Hello, Hockey World. Today is Friday, February 17th, 2023.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
I'm Kevin Allen, a little under the weather, but hopefully I can get through this.
And I'm Michael Lagello, and this is the HockeyBuzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com, where it's snowing in Buffalo. Gee, what a shock. Okay, well, let's start off. We talked about it a little bit yesterday, but we didn't have Kev on the show yesterday, and it certainly will lead us into one of our discussion points here. I think the theme of today is buyers and sellers. Who is not? What do they do? What don't they do? And the Detroit Red Wings are hot recently and are within a few points of a playoff spot, but they made a signing yesterday, which I don't know, from what you had said, Kev, because you had mentioned Olli Maatta as somebody that they might deal before the March 3rd deadline because he's playing so well, but Steve Yzerman signed the veteran defenseman to a 2-year deal at $3 million AAV. Not a big surprise, but a little bit because I thought he might be an asset that they would ship. But what did you think of this deal?
Well, I mean, I think Yzerman just sort of approached it kind of systematically. He just went through it and said, how do I replace him if I, move him off? And Maatta really wanted to stay. He's really found a home here. He likes the way they utilize him. He was a player, we've talked about this before, that came up as kind of a two-way guy or maybe even a little bit more of an offensive guy. And then he realized that his best way to stay in the NHL was to be a shutdown guy, a defensive guy. And he's really embraced that role. He can slide between the second pairing and third pairing. He's comfortable in either role. He's averaging about 18 minutes. And Yzerman just decided he's part of it. And what's interesting with that, of course, is they now have 5 defensemen, under contract, and that doesn't leave room for some of their younger guys to get in. But I think Yzerman has watched these guys long enough to know that another year or a start in Grand Rapids won't hurt anybody other than Edmonton. Edmonton will be with the team next year.
Yeah, I mean, Yzerman's creating like this pit where guys are going to just have to climb their way out, which is fine. I mean, he wants competitiveness on his team, obviously, and why hand guys contracts? I bet you Olli Maatta tried the pierogies, and that was probably the selling. For me, if I had a chance of moving there and making millions of dollars, if you put those pierogies in front of me, I'm signing.
And now it's Punchki time here in Michigan, and Punchkis, when they're made the old traditional way, don't look like those powdery things you see in the supermarket.
No.
And you can tell because the bakeries charge like $3.50 for one donut. I think that I'm pretty sure they have one. They have rum in them.
Okay.
I'm not positive of that, but I think so.
That's a selling point for me. Yeah, I know. And believe me, the pierogies that they sell in Wegmans in the frozen food section are not the pierogies that you would get.
They're okay, but they're not like that.
No.
Yeah, I mean, they're for a quick lunch, but
yeah, I'd recommend the Polish Villa in Cheektowaga. It's one of the best places around here. Okay, so let's sort of start with I don't know if we ever want to start with Alan Walsh, but Alan Walsh tweeted last night after the Detroit-Calgary game, and it was a victory for the Red Wings. Alan Walsh tweeted out, "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Also, negativity sucks the joy right out of players. CC NHL Flames." The reason I've been blocked by Alan Walsh is because Alan Walsh is the troll of NHL agents. He goes on social media and says stupid things or puts pictures with swords through the heart of Marc-Andre Fleury. And here, Russ, he's throwing shade at the Calgary Flames because the Calgary Flames are struggling right now. And I believe he's the agent for Jonathan Huberdeau. I think that's the reason why he opened his big mouth. And, Kev, the Wings win 5-2 over the Flames, and the Flames are struggling right now.
Yeah, they are. They're not the same team. I think everybody assumed. I remember the words coming out of my mouth saying, look, you'd rather have Tkachuk But Huberdeau, they're comparable players, and they're not. I mean, they haven't been this season, not even close. He's had a terrible season, and he's probably with one of the worst coaches to be with if you're not living up to expectations. And I think that might have something to do with what Allen has to say. And I mean, I always look at Allen like he just tries to stand up for his players. Like his guys. He takes it to the nth degree. It's like family to him. So, and I think some GMs just sort of get that and just kind of let it roll off of them, and some do not. Some take it personally. So, but there's definitely something wrong with that Calgary team because they're very difficult to play against, and they didn't seem that way last night.
Russ, I mean, the thing is, everybody realizes you'd rather have Matthew Tkachuk than Jonathan Huberdeau, but the problem is Matthew Tkachuk didn't want to be in Calgary anymore. He didn't want to sign a long-term deal there. So Brad Treliving made the best of a bad situation. Now, where I had a problem with is he trades for Huberdeau, and then he signs him for 8 years. Maybe he had to do that because Huberdeau could easily walk away after a year and then they have nothing to show for it. But, they really jumped into this, and Huberdeau is not a Daryl Sutter type player. He's a good player, but he's not a Daryl Sutter type player.
No, I also think if the goaltending were better, we probably wouldn't even be talking about this. Look, Daryl Sutter, I get it. He's going to rub people the wrong way, the way John Tortorella does. That's fine. Sometimes he does take the air out of the room. Sometimes he doesn't. But I listened to a lot of commentary on Calgary like a week or two ago, and the thought was, hey, they have two different goalies in Markstrom and Vladar, and they both make saves in different ways. And I forget who the guys were on this show, but they were like, you know what? Vladar seems to make the saves that you have to make, the easy saves all the time, whereas Markstrom doesn't. And I'm going to just come out and say it. I would just go with Vladar. I don't care what I'm paying Markstrom. I know Vladar has had some bad starts here lately too, but then he's had a real gem as well. But he doesn't play enough. You know what? I would just sit Markstrom for a while. Honestly, I think that would change things a little bit, and clearly they're not willing to do that. And I don't know if that's coming from Brad Treliving because they've spent so much on Markstrom, or if that's coming from Sutter because he doesn't want to waste Markstrom. But at some point, they're going to have to realize Markstrom's not their guy at the moment or ever, and try Vladar because he is a pretty good goalie.
Well, Kev, the situation, Markstrom was a Vezina finalist last year, but clearly his mind was broken, or his psyche was broken, or his confidence was broken by that series against Edmonton. He didn't play great in the first series again in the first round, but then Edmonton really, I think, broke him. And now he's not had a good year, but he's got 3 years left at $6 million. If at the end of the season Calgary decides maybe we want to move him, I don't think they're going to have a problem doing that, even with 3 years.
No, they won't. He was at the start of the season. He was on the NHL Network's list of top goalies in the league, and he's had a bad year. There's no doubt about it. But I always compare it to baseball starting pitchers, where you have like off seasons, and he last year played very well. So
Randy's got a good beat on it in the chat room, though. He said, Sutter's too loyal to a goalie when he makes up his mind. But see, that's where I think somebody like Treliving has to talk to him and say, hey, listen, we can't go literally, and this is not like a pun that I was thinking about to make it snappy, but you can't let it go down in flames because your goalie is not doing what you need him to do. I think you have to explore every opportunity, and I think this is a good time to explore the other guy.
Yeah, but I don't think it's all goaltending. At least
I think it would change the way they're playing.
Yeah, there's no doubt when your goalie is not winning games for you, you tend to play differently than you normally would. Even though players say that's not true, it is true. It's always been true. Yeah. But last night they just didn't seem like the same team all the way around. and their defense didn't seem to be as ornery as it normally is. They just didn't seem to. It's like they lost track of the Red Wings. And one thing about Daryl Sutter's team, his team usually wins the battle of intensity, and the Red Wings won it last night. Dylan Larkin was running all over. Bertuzzi had maybe his best game since he's come back from the second injury. He played very, very well. He was all around the net. He had a goal and 2 assists. So
with Detroit, we might not be able to say, hey, you can't talk about them as a playoff team anymore, because while you've been saying that, they keep creeping closer. So
they're 2 points behind now. They really have. I mean, a 5-game winning streak just makes all the difference in the world in a parity league. Like, they had been hanging around at 7 and 8 points for a long time, and they really hadn't gotten any closer. But they've won 5 in a row, and they won it the hard way. Like, they've won 3 in a row at the start of a 5-game road trip. Now, they haven't done that in 4 years, to win 3 consecutive games on the road in a single road trip. So they're feeling good about themselves. I wrote a piece today when I said you can call it swagger, you call it confidence in yourself, you call it being on a roll. I mean, we've heard players describe it in many different ways, but we understand the phenomena. The phenomenon is when you sort of get that inner drive and everybody's just feeling like you're invincible, you play the way the Red Wings are. And the other element, too, is they're healthy. Fabre is back. You've got 7 or 8 goals. Bergman was called up early in the season. He's got 11 goals. Like, they're starting to cash in on all the things that Yzerman has done. And, now they're there. And, they're right there with the Islanders. And they've got games in hand, although, I'm not so sure those are quite as valuable as Mike does. I mean, they can be, but as I said the other day, general managers look at it. They just divide number of points, it takes to win, and say they're worth, that point. So it's 1 point, per game. So the Red Wings have 3 in hand. So it's about 3.5 points. Well, that would put them in the lead by 1 point. By 1 point.
When a team has a game or 2 and you're right, Kev. When they have 5, like Buffalo does on some teams, then I think it is valuable, especially if they're within 3 or 4 points. So I think Detroit's in a really good position. I think Buffalo's in a really good position with all these games in hand and the way that the teams are playing. But that's what we're going to talk about later in the show. Are these teams are on the bubble and what we think they're going to do in the next 2 weeks? Because 2 weeks from today, we'll be holding our deadline show, probably starting at around 11 o'clock. The deadline is 3 p.m. on March the 3rd, which is a Friday. A Friday trade deadline is weird. I don't think
we should start at noon. 11 seems ambitious.
Well, okay, but we'll talk about it with Ak. If it's Ak, we're probably starting at 8 a.m. But Kev,
one thing, Mike, I did want to bring up because I thought it was interesting. It reminded me. The players see this all differently than we do, the general managers do. Like Fabre said, and someone was asking him post-game when they had pulled within 2. And like I said, there's been a lot of discussion in the dressing room about, they think they could do it. I mean, he was a member of that St. Louis team that went from the worst team in the league to, winning the Stanley Cup. And he said the one thing you got to do is, you have to keep in mind that on any given night, when there's that many teams involved in a single chase, is that half of them are going to win every night.
Right.
That's the general rule. So he said the only way you can keep this drive going is you've got to put together streaks.
Right.
And, that's what we did essentially back in St. Louis. And so, you can think even if you've got games in hand that you can just sort of nickel and dime your way there. It doesn't work that way. With the 6 teams, like, if Ottawa doesn't win, Buffalo will. And, the Islanders will lose, but Washington will. Florida will win, but, and he says they're all kind of fighting. And if one of them puts together a 5-game streak like us. So I think the players are a little bit more realistic about how it all works than we think they are. So
that's why a couple days ago, when I think it was the Islanders, the Caps, and Pittsburgh all lost and Buffalo won. That's an outlier. That usually doesn't happen. Usually,
that's right.
But we welcome Jan Levine from his office studio, and Anthony Mangione from Parts Unknown, because we have
driving, but apparently the camera isn't connecting. So
yeah, that's fine. We can hear you.
You look like you're in witness protection program. So
it just might be, Kevin.
Okay, you want to touch on a couple things and then talk about a few players that we haven't talked about in terms of trade deadline rumors, and then we'll go through some teams that we think, not what we think they should do, but what we think they're going to do. Because a lot of these bubble teams, I mean, the next 2 weeks, like Pierre Dorian comes out yesterday and says, well, we're going to see what we're going to do in the 6 or 7 games before the deadline, and if we're out of it by March the 2nd against the Rangers, then we'll make a decision. It's like, oh, I think he would have made a decision before then, but he's got a young team, and they've been talking this dual game for a while, where they're going to buy, they're going to sell, you don't know what they're going to do. It's all based on the ownership situation. But Anthony, I wanted to ask you, because I don't know if you watched a lot or any of the game last night between the Kraken and the Flyers, but the Kraken wins 6-2 over the Flyers, and again, Travis Konechny scores 2 goals. It doesn't seem like he's the type of guy that Chuck Fletcher is going to trade, but it is guys like Sealer and JVR. That's the extent of what they're going to do.
Spoke up.
Anthony, can you hear us?
I can hear you now. Yeah, there was.
Okay, no, I was all right. No, I was just saying, it doesn't seem like a guy like Konechny, who's got 26 goals, is a guy that Fletcher's going to move. But guys like Nick Sealer and JVR, who are rentals, it doesn't seem like like a month ago we were talking about Ristolainen and Sanheim and Provorov, and it just doesn't seem like those guys are going to move either.
No, I do wonder though about Provorov potentially if they get if an offer's there. I think that is something that might entertain, depending on where they're at. Again, if the track continues, then yes, I did not get a chance to watch the late game last night. That's something I'll be doing shortly. But seeing the results of the game, at least, it was a non-competitive game for Philadelphia, which is a concern.
It was a disaster.
It was a disaster, exactly. And I would say, again, it's interesting Fletcher's comments on Sealer, and a few people got incredulous about the fact that, they're not going to necessarily, jump on it immediately. Of course not. They're going to wait closer to the deadline when you maximize probably a 6 defenseman's possible return. But Provorov maybe is a possibility, but Konechny at this point, I think Tortorella has identified him as kind of one of the players that I think he sees core going forward. And what your potential return could be for Travis as well is something that I think you still have to consider at the deadline. But do I feel like it's going to take something to really move Philadelphia to get Konechny on the move? Yeah, I do.
Jan, it came out yesterday. I know that Pierre LeBrun, I know that Elliot Friedman started mentioning the possibility of Nashville being a seller if they didn't. David Poile apparently came out and said, this team needs to really get, kick it into gear, and if they don't kick it into gear, I don't know if he came out and said, I'm going to start, but anybody's available. But that's the general impression that's being floated by a number of the insiders out there. And then the Predators go out and lose 5-0 to the Boston Bruins. I looked over their roster, and the guy who in my mind would be the most desirable on this market would be Matthias Ekholm, but I don't know anybody who's trading for Ryan Johansson at $8 million or Matt Duchene at I think at $9 million. I just don't know if those guys are movable.
No, the problem is, as you said, a lot of these guys are signed to not just contracts, but longer term contracts, right? You have Ekholm even has 3 more years at $6.25 million, which is a bit pricey given what you're getting out of him. Ryan Johansson has several more years at the contract he has, which is $8 million for 2 years after this one. You have Duchesne for $8 million at 3 years after this one. You have Granlund for $5 million for 2 years after this one. So the population base of who they can move, and honestly, that Ryan McDonough contract right now is looking like an albatross as well at $6.75 million. I mean, Russ and I were obviously, huge fans, and when the Rangers got rid of him, probably got rid of him a bit too early, but the wear and tear of his body, A, from the Tortorella system, and then B, even in Tampa, has taken its toll. And while he's had an okay year, you'll look at the length of that deal, and Poyle maybe should look in the mirror in terms of some of the contracts he signed as opposed to the talent he put around them, which is the bigger problem, right? I mean, Duchesne and Johansson had those rebound seasons, but those are partially looking like aberrations as opposed to something we would expect to see moving forward.
Kev, the Preds, I mean, last year, Saros was a Vezina finalist. Duchesne had a really great year. Forsberg was on a salary drive. Tanner Jeannot was a legitimate Calder candidate until probably late in the year. He's not having a very good year. Duchesne's taking a step back. I mean, Forsberg is still good, and Roman Yossi's still one of the best defensemen in the league. But it just seems that there's not enough there with this team. And if I look at it, the guys who attract me the most are Nino Niederreiter, who's got a year left in his deal, and Ekholm. Other than that, I don't know if I would want to touch anybody.
Yeah, well, I think sometimes we're too quick to move into a strip down mode. But in the Nashville's case, they're in just the worst possible scenario where they're good enough to be competitive, and therefore they don't get higher draft picks to make themselves better, but they're not good enough to compete for a Stanley Cup. And they have players that are unmovable, as you pointed out. And I don't know, they've historically not been buyout organizations.
Right.
So I don't know that they're going to do that unless it got down to, the final year of a contract. I do not see them moving Ekholm. He plays too well. He's popular. So I don't know what they're doing. I agree with you, Niederreiter. And I wouldn't rule out, depending on what happens with the other top players, I wouldn't rule out Niederreiter ending up back in Carolina, where they really liked him.
Yeah.
They thought that he was a big contributor to them, but it just didn't work out. He didn't get the money that he had hoped for. He just thought that the Hurricanes were lowballing him, I think, and then he just couldn't get what he wanted out there, and he ended up with Nashville. So I could see them moving him, but yeah, I don't know what Poyle's doing, because they really do need a real significant change. But it's impossible to do because they cannot move those players. So I think they're almost stuck.
Yeah, I would say, Mike, going back to Duchesne, I mean, I'm pretty sure he has a no move. He wanted to be there for music for him and his wife. I don't think he's going anywhere. Like, I think he's immovable.
Oh, they can't move him. They've tried desperately, Russ, to move him.
Yeah, so I don't think he's movable anyhow. I do think Niederreiter is the guy they can move. And I just feel like Trotz is coming in at the end of the year, and he'll be their GM, and I think Poyle will be their president. And I just think that it just seems inevitable, especially when they miss the playoffs. I think that's the way they're going to roll.
Duchesne does not have a no move, and neither does Johansson. But the salary and
that'll keep him from moving.
Right. I could see Tanner Jeannot getting moved. I mean, I think that's a guy, because he's an RFA with Arbrights, and look, he had a great year last year. He's a fourth liner who basically stood up. I think he'll fit somewhere if they want to just move somebody to get another asset.
Value? But I don't know if he has value.
There is. All. I mean, there's been talk, obviously, New York going after him because they could use somebody like that potentially on the fourth line. But if you look at what he did with Tolvanen, right, we all thought getting rid of Eli Tolvanen was going to potentially come back to bite him. And you look at what he's done in Seattle, and that's been the case. And the question is, are we going to see the same with Philip Tomasino down the road, right? Is he going to be a guy that they string along and don't use, and he ends up going elsewhere and kind of parlays his talent?
Russ, Jeannot is another Maxime Comtois. He scored, Jeannot scored 24 goals last year. Now he's got 5 in 52 games. So, it might be a change of scenery situation. He's a big physical guy.
I just think he had that one moment. That's
yeah.
I don't know if they're ready to dump him.
Yeah, I don't think they're even considering Tomasino or him. Just they know what they are, and they're young. They're trying to sort it out. Like it's not the first player to have a sophomore issues. So I think we might be overthinking that a little bit.
Yeah, Thomas will be fine. I'm not worried about it.
Okay, so let's go into our sort of, and we can throw out any kind of term we want here. We can say they're going to be heavy buyers or light buyers or buyers and sellers or stand pat or whatever. But let's go through some of the teams where they are right now. We're exactly 2 weeks out from the deadline, and currently I'll just pull up the standings right now. Where in the West, it's not very competitive in terms of the wild card race. You really have a gap where Nashville is 5 points behind Minnesota, and Calgary are tied for the second wild card. Edmonton has got 66 points, so they're 10 points up on Nashville. I would say Nashville is borderline to be a seller, but I'll leave that for us. St. Louis is at 55 points. It would take a really dramatic fall by somebody in the West to sort of fall into that into that sort of nether region. So let's start with St. Louis. I mean, I think they've already started selling, and all we've heard is Barbashev, Achari, O'Reilly being sold at the deadline. I think they're going to sell them all. I think they're going to – not scorched earth because they may have a chance of re-signing one or two of these guys, but I think that Doug Armstrong is going to trade all of them before March 3rd. What do you think?
Yeah, that's the one team where I don't really understand what they're doing. Like, did the Blues really do they need a rebuild? Like, Tarasenko – he's been problematic for several years. There's really been kind of issues there. Like, he's the guy that they wanted to move out to change the culture a little bit and start to retooling and everything. But Ryan O'Reilly is a player that wants to remain there. It seems clear that maybe I'm not reading the tea leaves correctly, but I feel like he'll take less to stay there. Why aren't they interested? But TSN is reporting that you're right on, that they're going to move defensemen. And why? Like, they won 3 in a row. Like, they're still competitive. They're a much more competitive team in terms of potential than, say, Nashville is. Like, Nashville, I believe, if you can rebuild, do it, because you're not getting anywhere and you're not going to get any better. But St. Louis, to me, I think it seems like they're going a bridge too far. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, and Anthony, it's funny because as Kevin said, the TSN insiders said that there's now talk of them maybe trading a Justin Falk or Corey Krug or Colton Durango, all defensemen who have term, all who are good defensemen. I don't know if that might be a bridge too far in terms of what I think they're going to do, but I do think the report is O'Reilly wants to stay, but they only want to sign him for a short term, and he wants a longer-term deal. So if that sticks, then it makes sense that they're going to trade him as a rental, and maybe try to sign him in the offseason. And the same thing for Achari and Barbashev. What do you think St. Louis is going to do?
I mean, the indication to me is it started. I mean, again, Tarasenko, I think I agree with Kevin in that Tarasenko has been a unique situation that we've kind of known was probably at some point going to get Dells far back. And obviously, we talked about it last season. It's an interesting. They are there, and I'm the same boat as Kevin. Is that I'm not 100% sure what direction they are going to go in, but it seems to me like they are in the direction of being sellers. It's just everything about the what they seem to be doing right now seems to indicate that they don't necessarily, management has complete belief in what they have with this team right now, and that they may be at this point deciding, let's see, what we can get in return and start anew. And you have to, and again, we're not privy to what locker room dynamics might exist and things of that sort. Maybe that with Berube, the message is getting a little not quite as strong as it had been in past years. Mm-hmm. These are all factors that might go into it to say, hey, maybe we just need to shake things up here.
Now, Jan, interestingly, Elliot Friedman on his most recent podcast, we know that the Rangers last week got both Tarasenko and Mikkola in the deal with the Rangers. He is reporting that the possibility of the Blues sort of pooling their resources again in a deal where not trading O'Reilly or Achari or Barbashev in separate deals, that maybe trading two of them in a deal to maximize the assets that they get back. And that would entail them probably retaining half of O'Reilly's salary. But I think that's plausible because I think they want to get another first-round pick. I don't think they're going to get a first-round pick outright for O'Reilly, but I think if they pull him and Barbashev or him and Achari, I think they'll definitely get a first in that deal.
Yeah, I think if he and Barbashev potentially, I don't think Achari will rate that kind of a return, but I think Barbashev, given how he's kind of a Swiss Army knife, can move up and down the lineup, plug him anywhere, second line to fourth line, and given what he provides you. And then, O'Reilly, as we know, playoff proven guy, center, which they all look for clearly as you go down the stretch and into the playoffs. With the retention, it could be a possibility, given the amount of salary. Though I think Barbashev's at $2.25 million. If I'm not mistaken, right? Even if they had half, you're still taking on a decent chunk of change for both of them together. But yeah, I think asset-wise, interesting. They're now 6 points out of a playoff spot. And the bigger issue there has been the play of Binnington at times and Thomas Greiss. And Binnington is back on that roller coaster on the upward swing, though we never know how long that's going to last with him this year.
Russ, what do you think about the Blues?
I think the guys talked about will definitely get traded. I will say that I do think there's a chance that O'Reilly would come back. I'm looking at their cap space, and if they could get some lower price guys in these deals to plug in some spots besides whatever picks they have, possible they could do it. I kind of wonder would they do something like buy out Braden Shen? Because that contract just stinks, and he's not great. And so I would look at the buyout for that. If they could do that, they could bring back O'Reilly. That would be easy. And if he takes a little less, then they could be a better team, and they will have moved out at least some salaries. But I just look at that Braden Shen contract and say, you're
how many years are left on that, Russ?
It goes through 27-28.
Ooh, yeah.
6.5 a year.
Yeah, I don't see him doing that. Yeah,
the buyout on that would be prohibitive.
Brutal contract.
Maybe you can flip. Maybe you can flip them someplace for another team's problems. Crap for crap.
You got Saad at $4.5 million for the next 3 more years afterwards, which I'm not quite sure how well that contract's going to age either.
Maybe you buy out that one. If they buy out one of them, that could get them O'Reilly back. That's what I would look at. But
yeah, well, again, I would just point out that, we talk about that in terms of what it looks like at the end of the year, but in the modern sports world, certainly true. In other sports, but also in hockey, where you give them, more years, and it's not going to look good at the end of that contract, but you're just, you're accepting that the contract is actually for what, you're paying them for 5 years, and you give them 8, so, and that's just become a strategy in a salary cap world. So it's not like they don't know that, when they make these deals, that, it's just really the only way they can do it. I've talked to general managers who say, you guys criticize me either way, so it's better if I got a smaller AAV and then deal with the fallout at the end, because, he may not be there. So
I looked at the buyout. They could save 10.2 out of the 22. First 2 years, a couple of years in 20, 25, 6, and 6 and 7, where they'd have 4 point money, but then it's $2 million after that every year. I don't know. I still might buy out Braden Shen.
It's always a hard sell to ownership, though.
I know.
You're walking in that door and saying, I screwed up, and we're going to pay guys that aren't here, and it's going to reduce our salary cap a little bit. And
they are making a savings on it.
Russ,
this is if they don't rebuild, which I don't think they will, because
it's 10 years.
I know, I understand, but you're going to have this guy for 6 years doing very little.
Yeah. Oh, well, hey, he's having a bad year. Maybe he has a good year next year. It's not like he's 40 years old.
Mike is right. He's going to contribute something. You're just going to overpay him for what he does contribute.
Right.
Yeah.
But we already talked about Nashville. Calgary right now is tied with Minnesota for the second wild card spot, and we talked a little bit about how they just seem right now discombobulated, Kev. But so
Right.
I don't know where they go at the deadline, but I do think that Brad Treliving recognizes that something has to be augmented there.
No, you're right on, Mike. Like, I think he's going. This is one of those cases where, you make a trade to shake up the team, like, and I think he'll do that. And they've been linked to everybody. Like, it's funny. Like, you see a rumor, and Calgary's in the middle of it. So,
Right.
So I don't know what they're going to do, but I think they will do something. And Treliving has been aggressive. His historically, he's hasn't stood idle. He's gone out and tried to make things happen. So I see them doing something, but I wouldn't even want to guess what they're going to do.
Yeah, Ross, I heard somebody say that they might be in on Bertuzzi because Bertuzzi is a Sutter type of player, but I think they're going to do something. So I would
need to stay away from things like that. I honestly,
well,
Calgary needs to stay away from that. If anything, Calgary should wait till the last minute because they could be selling. But in the end, if they're in it, they shouldn't buy. I don't think Bertuzzi's the guy for them. I don't.
Well,
I think they need something a little more definite.
Anthony, we did hear JVR to Calgary, which that's the most un-Sutter-like player out there, but they need.
Although you could say he was also the most John Tortorella player, and he's done perfectly well under John Tortorella.
True.
So I wouldn't necessarily completely take that out of the possibilities.
Right.
Yeah, it's Sutter recognizes he can't have a team full of Sutter guys. Like, he's got to have scorers. And,
not everybody can be Trevor Lewis.
Yeah, he needs goals. He understands that. So
Yes,
that makes some sense. So
he had some skill players in LA, so you have to mix in the skill with the physicality. Now they're tied with Minnesota, and we've heard the Besser talk. We've heard basically it sounds like they want to add a scorer. So I don't know if they're going to be like ridiculously heavily involved in, but I do think they're going to make a move. So I would say light buyers, not really heavy buyers. Kev, what do you think?
Yeah, no, and I like the Besserman. I've had a chance to see him twice. The Rebels have played them twice, and Besser can play. And like, I don't think they want to move him, but I think they feel they've got to lower their cap hit a little bit to give them some freedom to make other moves, because they got to fix their defense and so forth. So, if they're moving him, they're going to be moving him to try to improve their team. So, like, is he the type of guy you move at the deadline, or would you be better off trying to move him in the summer? I think, in the summer would make more sense. But, if they get the right offer, I'm sure they'll do it. But, they're looking for help. So they're not, I think they're going to try to make a 1950s, 1960s, 1970s type of trade where.
Right. A hockey deal is what you're thinking.
Yeah, that's what they call them. But,
yeah, but I mean, I know that, and Jan, I'm skeptical of this because I like this player so much, but there's been chatter about like Jordan Greenway in a deal going to Vancouver for Besser. And I wouldn't want to give up Jordan Greenway. He's a Mack truck. He's just he might, he's not having a fantastic year right now.
How does that help Minnesota?
I know. That's why the rumor didn't make him a lot of sense. Now, if they traded Dumba, who's somebody who is an expiring contract that they probably can't re-sign, and they traded him for Besser, then that would make more sense. But then they weaken themselves on defense. I mean, what do you think Minnesota is going to do?
First of all, look, Greenway is a physical player,
yes.
But Besser clearly would upgrade offensively them tremendously. They have a good team, but he really kind of takes them kind of to another level in terms of offensively to go along to give somebody to defray some of the scoring responsibility from Boldy and from Zuccarello and Kaprizov. So I don't think it's that far-fetched. The only problem is Minnesota's up against the cap, and Besser's making $3.65 million more right now than Greenway does. So I'm not quite sure how they fit him in unless Vancouver is willing to eat some salary to do it, which may defeat some of the purpose of them making a move. Right now for Vancouver, because I watched the game against the Rangers the other night, offensively, even without Horvat, they can still score. I mean, there's a lot of offensive talent still on that team. Defensively, that team is wolf bad. I mean, that team is horrific. I mean, look, I know they were playing their third string goalie the other night who got just strafed, but their blue line is just embarrassingly bad right now. And Taka's got a lot of work ahead of him to kind of get them to play a much better defensive structure, given what I saw in that contest.
I mean, I'll give you a guy, Mike. I think you look at Montreal and let Montreal eat half of Dadonov's contract, and I think that's somebody Minnesota could use because that's a guy who we've seen him switch addresses and at least give goals to the new team, and that's something they could use. So I could see that, and he won't come at a hefty price.
No, and that's
I'll give you one more, Mike. Mike, I'll give you one more. Jonathan Drouin is another guy to consider. So the UFA after the year guy. Look, he may not give you the same level, but if you can't make one for the big boys, that's one of those guys you might be able to slide in potentially if Montreal eats half the contract.
I always keep putting Jonathan Drouin and Colorado together because him and McKinnon played, but but it would have to be for an absolute song that they would do that. And Flamester said, can the Wild take the 6.5 back from Besser? That's why I floated Dumba, because Dumba is $6 million. So
but they don't want to trade Dumba this season. Right. They're going to ride it out.
Exactly.
Aaron has already said that.
Right. I mean, and that that makes sense. But so Anthony, the Edmonton Oilers, I mean, I wrote something for Full Press yesterday to say that I understand why they would want Carlson. Who wouldn't want Carlson? But that 11.5 thing, that's a little troublesome. And
you have to work that out for sure. Yes.
Yeah. But I still think if it's now it's apparently the plan B for them. If it isn't Carlson, might be Gostisbehere. Might be
that is a terrible plan B from Carlson.
At
least with Carlson, you have some level of you're going to get some level of defense, whereas Gostisbehere, you're getting a pure offenseman in this case.
Yeah, I heard the same thing. Someone told me Gostisbehere too. I personally think, and Anthony said it would take something good, but Edmonton still has some assets. I think if they failed on Carlson, maybe they would look at Travis Sanheim. I do. I think. Because that would help him in the future too. Sanheim, I think he needs a change of scenery. His overall play has still not gotten to the level that it should be in Philly, but probably could somewhere else. And he's comfortable there.
I mean, it's going to have to come down to the point, I think, at a certain point, Philadelphia is going to have to make a choice between Provorov and Sanheim. And the fact of the matter is, one player is locked in long term, and the other one. Obviously, that's a contract that is also locked in long term. But who's the one you committed to sooner, more recently?
Right, and in the chat, Klingberg was talked about before the season, but they didn't go that direction. And I mean, maybe they would go that direction now based on what Anaheim is looking for him. But I don't know. Maybe I think that might be a better plan B than Gostisbehere. The point I'm making is I think Edmonton is going to be a buyer. I think that's going to be a buyer specific to one thing, a blue line help. They're not going to do anything with their goaltending. I don't think they're really going to add another forward, although they could. I mean, there's talk about them with Patrick Kane. I'd love somebody to explain to me how these teams trade for Patrick Kane. I really would. It's just
how are you trading for Carlson? Carlson's more salary. I mean, how are you fitting in 11.25 million?
Nobody's fitting in. Like I said, we got to move past that. Nobody's making that deal at $11 million. This is all going to be. They're going to reduce the price. So
even half the price, right? The question is, what do they get rid of? Because right now they're fairly up against the cap Edmonton to begin with. Unless you find two teams to take on 50% and another 50%.
I can tell you, Jan, that they have a plan for doing it in. Now,
I'm sure they do.
The question is, whether they can get done, because right now the ask is too great. Like I would do it in a heartbeat for 2 first-round picks. I really would.
If Greer would retain $4.5 to $5 million, but he
correct
want to do it.
Yeah, no, and that's right. He is willing to. Now he has said publicly that that it's untrue that he wants 3 first-round picks to go down to $7 million. Now, if that's the case, I mean they just got to work it out. I mean, so. One thing about Sharks, I want to talk about this because Sheng Peng, and I know you guys know him. He used to work for HockeyBuzz. He now works in our chain.
We are going to we were going to have him on Off the Post this weekend. Yes.
Yeah, he wrote a real interesting story about the pros and cons of trading Meyer, and it fit into another conversation I had with the general manager about, whether they're making the right decision to trade him now, because he's going to be a restricted free agent. And, again, to what Ken Holland told me years ago, anybody can make a $10 million contract work for 1 year. He said it's really not that hard. You just have to figure out some way to move, and you can do it. And that would give them so many options. So the GM said to me, he said, if it was me, he said, unless I got exactly what I wanted, I'd plan on having him next year. And he goes, is there some risk? Sure. He could get hurt in training camp. He lost for the season, and then you'll get anything. But he said, the odds are that he won't get hurt. So he said, I would do that. And then you got more time. You can get in. It's a lot easier in the off season to move people and do everything else. Right. But trying to, get it down to Carolina or New Jersey or whoever it is, and trying to get the right assets, like right now, like what's the hurry? Like what is the rush?
That's a completely right, because if you don't get the offer, sort of like the Arizona situation with Chychrun, if you don't get the offer that you want, you have time. You can qualify him. You can sign him for that year, but then you're up against it, because next year, I believe, after they qualify him, he is a UFA after next season. So
well, yeah, but I mean, they know that, so they can, he's just the rental, and they can move him. But you can move him at any point during the season. Right. You can move him in the off season. So
that's a good point.
So, go ahead.
They have that one coming. They're going to have a high pick in this draft. Yeah, I mean, they probably shouldn't be in a rush.
Right.
Now, talk about the teams in the Pacific here. We'll try to go quicker here, because I want to see if we can get to the East. If not, we'll do that on Monday. Actually, we'll do the East on Monday, because I don't want to fast forward through the West. The LA Kings have been connected to Chychrun. That was last weekend. It still hasn't happened. It sounds like it was close, and then there was a pullback. The Kings are right now, they're 1 point up on Edmonton, but they're significantly up in the race for the wild card. So I think that there's definitely a move here, Russ, where Rob Blake seems not desperate, but seems extremely motivated to make a deal that will help them get in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's been very aggressive the last couple of years. I think, me personally, though, I think they re-signed Mikey Anderson long-term. That kind of told me I don't think they're going for Chychrun now, because I think Anderson might have been in that deal. But now if they don't feel like they're getting Chychrun, Anderson's a good guy to keep around. And I think they are going to still get somebody, and I do think they'll probably add to their offense. And look, I mean, they have some young guys that are doing great. Like Adrian Kempe is having a great year. He never gets talked about. They and this is a guy who, I liked in the draft simply because he played difficult, physical, and he called himself a warrior. And that's what you feel you are on the ice. I'm going to love that player every time, and he's really come through. I think they just need something else, because they have a lot of young talent. They need something a little more proven, a guy they can rent this year and could help them score a little bit. I think that's what they really need, and I think that's what they're going to end up getting.
Russ, is there a dividing line pretty much with regards to Brandt Clark being included in a trade?
I think there is. I don't think
they're flat out that they're not even remotely willing to negotiate it at all.
No, I think they would negotiate it, but I don't think they're willing to really move him unless it was something stunning, because he's so close right now. And he could be better than Chychrun in the future. So unless you feel like he's winning you the cup in the next 2 years, why are you doing this? You have Clark under control for a lot of years.
That smacked to me as a trial balloon, not the Chinese spy balloon, but a trial balloon from Arizona to get Clark or to get Byfield or somebody bigger in that deal, and that fell
Byfield, who is coming along slowly, but again, sometimes power forwards do. It would take a lot. I mean, it would take a lot for them to move off of him, because he still has very good games, Byfield. He just has to put it all together.
My take on this is a little bit different than Russ's. Not a lot, but I think it's Anderson, I don't think was going to be in that deal, because I think what Rob Blake is trying to do, because he was a premier defenseman, is he's trying to build a long-term defense. And Chychrun, Anderson, and his group of younger guys, are all part of that. And I don't think so much as he's trying to get in the playoffs. I think he thinks he's good enough to do it. I think he wants to stay in the playoffs. And I think that's what this is all about. I don't think this deal is done, but I don't think it's anywhere close to being, Edmonton.
Kev, let me ask you this. The reason I say playoffs is because their goaltending is not great.
No, it isn't. But, you can always believe. We've seen, goalies have stepped up. John Casey years ago, Reggett, goalies have come out of nowhere and, just played well. So, you can always dream a little bit. And I think they just want to have some hope. But, the thing about Chychrun is you have him for 2 years, and then, he may love it there and, sign on. And, I think that the idea of having, players of that ilk, I mean, that could be a pretty formidable defense for a long time.
And Jan, the interesting thing about LA is, Arizona has said, it's been reported that they don't want the hurdle here was they don't want anybody other than entry-level contracts, that they don't want anybody with term or big money. And the report was, and I said it a few days ago, and then it's been coming out that, LA wanted to include Cal Peterson in this deal. And that's $5 million for a couple more years. And that is a statement about how bad financially Arizona is right now. If they can't take a big salary back.
No, it's not. It's a reflection of the fact they've lost $30 million and they don't want to lose 35. Right. Like, it's not,
and they're also not getting a guy back who's worth the $5 million contract that he has right now.
Like anybody would do that in their position. They just don't want to, these are real losses to them. So, they're going to sustain whatever the loss is going to be. You don't want to add $5 million onto it.
So, Russ, let me ask you from a prospect perspective, if they would I'm not sure if LA would do it or would Arizona want, would if they're not going to move Byfield or they're not going to move Clark, would Turcotte seal the deal? Would Kaliev have any interest? Would Kupari
I
have
don't
any
know if they
interest?
would
Or all
move
those are here below?
I don't know if they would move Kaliev, but I guess in Chychrun they might. Turcotte definitely, I think they would move. They still like him. Like, I've spoken to people, and I still see that there is something there, but he just might be with them because there's not a lot of opportunity now for Turcotte there, and I think somewhere else, giving him the opportunity would be good. Also, one other thing that I just saw that had come through late January for Arizona on their arena deal. They actually would have to get voters to vote 3 separate ballot measures to make that deal happen in May. Like, they have to vote 3 different things on it. Like, so when you go in to vote, you have to hit yes 3 times for them to do it. I don't know. That's a lot. To me, that seems like a lot.
As HockeyBuzz's resident skeptic, I say nada. It's not happening, but okay.
Just one thing about, and Russ can talk about this better than I can, but, it speaks to the idea of how hard it is to draft.
Oh, yeah.
When Turcotte and Zegras were in the same draft, many teams liked Turcotte better than Zegras.
Because he was a safer thing. He was like a short thing. He played defense. I had Turcotte ranked a couple spots higher too. Only the Zegras's, the ceiling there was massively high, but Turcotte was looked at as safe and leadership ability. Right. Yeah, I get it.
Now, the interesting chatter regarding the Kraken has been Carson Soucy, who was a UFA at the end of the year. They like him, but they can't get him signed, at least right now. And there's talk, Kev, of them maybe adding a defenseman, but also trading Carson Soucy because they don't want to lose him for nothing.
Yeah, and that could be, why, they might still be interested in Klingberg. Even though we've heard nothing about Klingberg, not a word.
No.
But if they moved him and they were going to get Klingberg back, then that would make some sense. But they may do that. Why lose a guy for nothing? Because as good as the Kraken have played this year, they're not going to win the cup. So
no. But,
no, but what kind of world do we live in where a team can't sign Carson Soucy? Like, what is this world coming?
Oh, let's just say, Russ, they probably don't want to sign Carson Soucy for what Carson Soucy wants.
Right.
So
he did have a career year last year, no question about it.
But there is motivation for that franchise to make the playoffs, Jan. And you would think that, I don't know if they're going to prospects or draft to make that an eventuality, but I do think that they're going to try to improve enough to lock up a playoff spot for the first time.
Yeah, no, look, I think they made their move on deal. Who did you ask, Anthony? I'm sorry.
No, Jan. No, finish.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you. I mean, I look, the year that they've had, Martin Jones has had a resurrection, which came as a surprise. He's regressed a little bit. Grubauer's come off the injury list. He started to play well. Jordan Eberle's started to play well. You know what you've gotten out of Matty Beniers this year. I mean, even with the whole Sheen Wright up, should have been sent down probably, initially. It's been a relatively successful year, and they're on pace to make the playoffs. So, right now, I don't think the fan base is clamoring necessarily that they have to make the playoffs in year two, especially given the rebound from what they saw in year one. But from a story perspective and kind of how to build additional interest in Seattle and maintain that interest, them making the playoffs would probably go a long way to doing so.
Okay, I'm going to pair these two teams together because personally, I think they're both going to take big swings. So I think they're going to be heavy buyers. One is Vegas and the other is Colorado. Vegas because of the Stone injury, and he's going to be out for at least the rest of the regular season. So they have $9.5 million to play with. And Kev, when they have that kind of money to play with, they're going to use it. And Colorado, I think they see themselves having a chance to earn a second straight Stanley Cup. And, they can add, I think it's going to be that number 2 center, whether it's Monahan or Taves or Ryan O'Reilly or whoever. I think they're both going to take big swings. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Montreal media has been writing that, time is running out to showcase Monahan, that, he's still not back. And there's concern that they won't be able to make that deal. So, because nobody's going to take him without watching.
About that when they got him, remember, time,
So I don't know. Vegas people are writing too about that Stone's injury may not be season-ending, and the Vegas Golden Knights wanted some clarity before they make any final decision about when he is expected back. They don't want to get stuck where they're
like last year, Dadnoff.
Yeah. So they don't want to do that now. You're right. I mean, if it was, going to be a week either way, then he would just, take that time off and come back during the playoffs. But I would expect them to do something.
So Russ, do you agree that Colorado and Vegas will be big swingers at the deadline?
Yeah, I still am looking at JVR going to Vegas. I know they were in the building. I'm pretty sure they were scouting him pretty heavy. He would he would check a lot of boxes for them. I do feel like that could happen there. And yeah, Colorado's going to look for a center. I don't think they're going to get the center they want. That's why I was saying Dvorak might be an option for them. But it's hard to get a second line center. I don't think they're really going to be able to do that. And just because the chat room's asking, Henry Thrun is a terrific defenseman. And if I'm the Buffalo Sabres, since they have coaches that have coached him, I would try and lure him when the free agency period begins for him in August. That's what I would do.
The Avalanche have a Kadri size problem.
Yep.
At center, basically.
Right.
They lost.
And Vegas see, that's the thing is I know the connection to JVR to Vegas with Kessel, and that might be a good fit, and they could fit the salary or most of the salary because of the Stone LTIR. But I think I have a feeling that they're going to be swinging bigger than that. Maybe Kane, if Kane, if not him, then another. I don't know about Timo Meyer. I don't know if they have the assets to make that deal happen. But maybe it will be JVR. I just think that may not be big enough for them. Jan, I don't know. Jan, are you there? Okay,
I'm here.
What about Vegas and Colorado? Do you agree they're going to make major moves?
Yeah, I mean, I think Colorado is pretty much a given. Given what we've seen coming off, title last year, despite all the injuries this year, expected, going to get Landeskog back hopefully at some point in time, right? You've had a myriad of injuries. We all know that their viewpoint at this point in time is we're just going to have to worry about getting in the playoffs.
Right.
And as long as we're healthy, we know we can do damage when we get there, given what we've seen in the past. I would think there'd be buyers. Vegas, given what we've seen in their past history, yes, look, we've discussed before, the team that used to exist years ago is vastly different from what we see now, and they just constantly seem to keep churning and adding guys and adding guys and adding guys. So not that they've gotten the end result from it, but with Stone out and the expectation is that the hope he'll be back playoff time, I would think they'd add somebody now, cognizant just like what Tampa had with Kucherov. They're going to get a material asset back once the playoff starts, which if they add somebody now, just deepens their opportunity down the road.
Yeah, the final two in the West, the two top teams in the Central, separated by only 2 points, Dallas and Winnipeg. I mean, Kev, we've heard Dallas, Bertuzzi, we've heard Kane, we've heard. It seems like Jim Nill is going to do something impactful. And he's got the assets to do it. They have a lot of prospects.
Yeah, they do. It's kind of like Ted Lasso, we believe type position there. They really do think they have a chance to make a run. They think they have a playoff style team. Their defense is good. Their goaltending is strong, and they got enough offense, but it could be better. And that's why I think they are going to look at Bertuzzi. Plus, he gives them some snarl. As well, and I think they'll look at others too. I think they'll look at Kane, just whatever, if Kane, I don't know that Kane is on or Dallas is on Kane's list, but there can always be some recruiting done. So we'll see. But I'm with you. They're going to get somebody.
Now, Russ, I think that's where Dallas is going. Winnipeg has $7 million in cap space. That would be enough if he is healthy and if Chicago retained 50% for them to get Taves. But the question is whether they want Taves or need Taves, whether they want to go some other direction. I've heard JVR in connection with Winnipeg. So what do you think the Jets need?
I think they need Taves, and I think if Jonathan Taves even hints that he wants to go there, they'll jump at it. I think they would. I mean, that's who everybody in that area would love to see there. It would be fun. I think that it would also be really good for Taves because – hold on, Ed. It'd just be really good because I think it could revive him. And he's had a good year already. So,
Anthony, Dallas and Winnipeg.
Yeah, I'll start with Winnipeg first. The Taves thing to me makes a lot of sense, especially in light of the fact that there's a pretty good chance PLD may or may not be back in this circumstance. To have Taves then in there, not just for this run, but going forward. I mean, granted, older player in this circumstance, but still could fill that's a need that's filled for now and for a few more seasons at the very least if you lose PLD.
Is there anybody else though that's concerned that he was put on IR for an illness?
Right. The question is if he is available because right now it's starting to sound like that mysterious illness that he had that kept him out for the last year.
I'm not willing to go there, but it doesn't. When you go on an IR with an illness, it's
that's a fair point. It does. Yeah. It would have to be last minute, and he probably would have to really be healthy, clear from physicals for sure.
Right.
So, Jan, Dallas, I think Dallas is going to make a move for an impact forward, and I think Winnipeg could. So these are two teams that are going to be engaged before March 3rd.
Well, I mean, harkening back to what we talked about, it'd be interesting. I don't know if the two teams would ever make a deal with each other, but put O'Reilly on Dallas as their second-line center, and how good does that team look come playoff time? I mean, that's kind of almost like a perfect fit in terms of the organization that exists there, right? You get to slide Fox down a little bit. That becomes a really deep. None again. The two teams, given the divisions they're in and the conference they're in, I don't know if they'd ever do it. I don't know if St. Louis is actually going to move O'Reilly, but that's kind of almost like a perfect fit if you think about for St. Louis and Winnipeg. Look, they made a run a couple years ago to the Western Conference Final. You know how good Hellebuck is between the pipes. They're a pretty deep team, so I do think they're going to add also to try to augment their chances because Colorado's the favorite. But I mean, we've seen one goalie gets hot, they can make a deep run in the playoffs.
I think the Blues are going to move O'Reilly, but I have a feeling it's going to be, Carolina, Boston, Toronto. It's going to be East.
I think Boston seems like that team.
Yeah, I think Toronto could be in it too. I think he's the type of impact move that they would make. But okay, guys, we'll talk about the East on Monday when we get back together. But great show, guys. Well, I hope everybody has a great weekend. For Anthony Mangione, for Jan Levine, for Kevin Allen, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. Thank you for watching. And remember, without the buzz, it's just